Hello all, and thank you for joining us for the NASP 2020 Property Benchmarking Tutorial. My name is Leslie Warnick. I'm the CEO of NASP, and I'd like to talk through what the agenda is for today, and then I'm going to turn it over to our consultants for consulting to explain the tutorial and walk you through the process. But wanted to just give a little bit of background on NASP benchmarking. Happy to say that this is now the 17th year in a row that NASP has conducted benchmarking studies. Our initial study was in 2003, and since then NASP has commissioned line of business studies in property, auto, work comp, and even a health study. The line of business studies are run every 3 years, and in between those years, we also conduct dashboard studies for the industry on the top 10 most valuable metrics. We continue to evolve, and the study continues to become more and more valuable to the participants. We appreciate any feedback that our participants have, but we also understand that there are questions from participating carriers on the proper way to submit data, or perhaps on definitions, or questions that are being asked for the participants in the responses. So we want to clarify some of those for you here today. And again, at the beginning and at the end here, we will provide you with an email that you can communicate both with NASP and with Brick Consulting. The email for NASP is info@subrogation.org. So feel free, once you're watching this webinar, if you have any questions, to reach out, and we will certainly get those answers for you. It's with great pleasure that I turn this over to Robert and Kevin Erickson of Brick Consulting. We contracted with Brick Consulting several years ago, and they've been great partners with us as we've conducted line of business studies for the last few years. And as I said, we continue to look for ways to make this even better. So Kevin, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you and explain away. Thank you, Kevin.
Great. Yeah, thanks a lot, Leslie. Appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who took the time today to watch this. Again, the goal here is we hope that everyone is in the process of filling their property study and they're maybe halfway through. We wanted to jump in and give some clarifying comments on a few specific pieces of data, questions that you might have, that this will hopefully walk you through a couple examples and clarify a few things. Now, one thing to note in all of this is that the glossary is key. So even if this is your third or fourth time through one of these studies, we would ask you to go through and just quickly read through that glossary to make sure that you're comfortable with the terms and the assumptions that maybe your company is working with are the same that we're expecting response-wise as we pool all of these resources together. It's really key, and the whole study really hinges upon us all using the same backdrop and rationale for how we calculate the data. And so that's one of the major impetuses for us putting this out there, that even if you've done this before and you don't have any questions, we'd ask you to stick along for just a couple minutes and go with us as we walk through a few examples and go through a few definitions, just to make sure that we're all using the same data, so that when we do push this out, that we can all be fairly confident that the data we're looking at is going to be helpful to run our business. So coming up are going to be about 5 or 6 different calculations and pieces of data. The first here, the thing that we want to point out is that we want to make sure that you clean up all of your paid losses. So a lot of times different expenses can get baked in there, and there have been questions about what should or shouldn't be included. At the end of the day, we want paid losses to really just be that. ALAE expenses and things like that, we'll have other chances to incorporate those in. But anytime that we're asking for paid losses, one of the big key components of this property study, it's really critical that that's cleaned up as much as possible. Next calculation coming up is discussing either a calendar year versus accident year. Most folks that we've talked to are pretty comfortable with that. We just want to make sure as you're pulling the data to make sure that your systems and the folks that you're completing the study with are all looking at this on a calendar year basis. So here at the bottom, we've got just barely even an example, but just pointing out that by definition, when a claim occurs, that is our calendar year, opposed to when the claim was closed or a variety of different things that happen with the claim. We want to know on a calendar year basis how that information or how that claim occurred. We'll have chances later on to identify accident year if you're able to do that in your system. But basically, any question on the study almost exclusively is going to be calendar year, except for those few times when we take out accident year. So again, make sure you go back, check the glossary to make sure that you understand that. If there are any questions, as Leslie said, reaching out to NASP is a great idea. And then at the end here, we've also got an email for us at BRIC where you can reach out to us as well. Our next one here about subrogation potential is really definitional, but we'll walk through it briefly. You want to make sure that you're using actual cash value amounts, and this is something that'll come up occasionally on these studies, is exactly how we're going to report these things. So follow the definition that we have here. At the bottom, we've got a small example that's going to combine subro potential with calendar year. So this comes up later on in the study, but you'll see questions asking for a bunch of different claims submitted to the collection vendor, and then their subro potential. So we want to list the number of claims submitted in the year requested, and that's our calendar year, regardless of the loss year. So that would have been our accident year. But importantly, for the subro potential, it's going to be based on those same claims. So that's the way that we kind of track these claims as they're going through the system, is that our potential is matching up with the same claims from that calendar year basis. Next up on our tutorial is the policy state versus our loss state. Again, this is big in auto, but you know, we can see this pop up in property as well. We're always doing the loss state, and we've worked on this over the last few years, and we've discovered that this is sort of either the most consistent or at least the most helpful for most of our respondents to be sticking with the loss state. And so that's sort of the line in the stand that we're going with here. So please use the loss state and make sure that the data you're pulling is loss state specific. Next up, big on property, of course, are our CAT claims. When you're pulling these, we found that a few carriers might be using different definitions for what exactly is a CAT claim and what's not. For the purpose of these reports, we're going to be going with the PCS designated time periods and locations using those codes. And as a reminder, we've had a few questions about this. PCS talks about $25 million or more in losses, and that is for the industry as a whole, not for the carrier specific. So if you go back and you're looking at PCS stuff really fast, see that $25 million number, do not think that has to be your portfolio in a specific area. It's, of course, talking about the industry as a whole, which you don't necessarily need to worry about because PCS is going to designate that. So once it's claimed designated as a catastrophic area, that's when we're going to start pulling the data. The CAT claims on the study are called out. I believe they're in specific tabs, so you really only need to think about it on a few slivers of occasions. Otherwise, we don't need to worry about it. But when it comes up, we want you to use these codes and definitions here. Almost finished up here. We've got two more examples and areas we wanted to focus on. And these last two are really, really critical for everybody. So when we are looking at recoveries on file with potential, one of the common questions is exactly what does this mean? So the files with potential are any files that were accepted or assigned into subrogation for a pursuit, and the recovery on those are simply the recovery on the files with potential. So a better way to say that might be, we want to basically track these claims the whole time. So we want to cut out or carve out those files that do have potential, and then take the recovery specifically on those files. So hopefully through your system, you're able to track sort of one for one the claims with the potential. And when you see this question come up, I called out specifically question Q2, that's what we're asking for. So we don't want your total recovery for your whole book for that year. We need it just on those files that were identified as having potential. They were sent to Subro, they were worked on. We want to know which ones of those had recovery and the amount of it. Last up, our 8th point here is about subrogation expense. The big takeaway here is that Subro expense is unique to this whole process. There are a lot of expenses incurred throughout the claim early on when there's a first notice of loss and down the road, but our Subro expenses that we've called out here are very different, and we only want those Subro expenses reported, not the initial ones that are incurred by the frontline adjusters. So the example there at the bottom, please read it, I'll read it for you, is that the common ones are subrogation attorney contingency fees, hiring product liability experts and things like that. Our other types of fees or expenses that we get, like police reports, statements, and things like that, those are different and separate from the Subro. So we think that most people have a pretty good line on that, but we have had questions come up. And so we want everybody, if you can, while you're in the middle of this, to take a quick step back and make sure that the expenses are split out. This is one of those big questions, and one of the big pieces of data that we look back and we'll continue to look back on the dashboards is exactly, how our expenses, the costs to get our recoveries are incorporated in, sort of our gross versus net. So we really want to make sure that this is one of those key pieces. Please take a look and download this PDF or show this to the rest of your team that might be working on this. If nothing else, even if there are no major takeaways, we hope that everybody pushes back and goes back to the glossary, even if you've been through this a few times, to ask any questions that you might have and make sure that you're validating all the data that you're sending to us. We try as much as possible at BRIC to validate and clean up all the data, but we're not going to catch everything, especially if your data is sort of mixed up and it sort of looks okay from off the cuff. We're trusting a lot that the data that you're sending us is accurate. Please ask us for any questions that you might have to validate. You've got the email address down there, info@bricconsultingllc.com. And also NASP is a fabulous resource as well, and we'll be able to get back to you as well. Thanks again, everyone, for their time. And if there's nothing else, wish you good luck on the rest of the property study. We look forward to getting your results.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks all.